Hi everyone, it's Ryan here and welcome to episode 84 of the road.cc podcast in association with Hammerhead. And for this week's episode we decided to nip across the Atlantic, virtually at least, to take a deep dive into one of the more curious and headline-grabbing bike tech studies of recent years. That academic study, published earlier this month by three US-based cybersecurity researchers, explored the security features of Shimano's Di2 electronic shifting systems, the most common method of changing gears in the pro peloton. And rather worryingly, they concluded that they can be hacked by a relatively simple and cheap radio technique, one that potentially has the power to allow nefarious individuals by the roadside or even in the peloton itself to change or jam a pro rider's gears during maybe the defining climb or moment of the Giro or Tour de France, potentially even scuppering their chances of victory. And no, you're not the only one picturing poor Andy Slack wrestling with his chain on the Porte de Balais at the 2010 Tour de France, an image that I think is seared into my mind as a young cycling fan at the time. Of course, as anyone who's even accidentally switched over to pro cycling on the TV knows all too well, cheating and trying to one-up your rivals through illegal dirty deeds is an integral part of the sport's history, from Maurice Garin allegedly taking a train at the 1904 Tour to the cocktail of drugs that sustained the likes of Copy and Anquetil and the heavy-duty blood doping of the 1990s and 2000s. But setting aside vials of EPO and fridges of blood bags, it's over the past decade or so has been the prospect of technological cheating that has reared its head, with persistent allegations of hidden motors swirling around the peloton. So this latest study of hacking gears, hacking wireless electronic shifters, which for the first time seems to indicate that pro cyclists could gain an advantage not by making themselves go artificially faster, but by slowing down or even stopping their rivals, has certainly rang some alarm bells throughout the cycling world. Faced with the prospect that their wireless gears can be easily hacked by about a £150 system, Shimano confirmed that they come up with a firmware fix now being used by all pros, but is, and I quote, wireless doping a proper existential threat to the cycling world? To find that out, we spoke to one of the researchers behind the much talked about Di2 analysis, Dr. Erlens Fernandez from the University of California in San Diego, about what inspired him to delve into the security setup and flaws of wireless shifting, how hacking someone's gears actually works, his subsequent interactions with Shimano, and how pervasive he thinks the threat of wireless doping could be to both the pro cycling world and us everyday plotters out on a Saturday group ride. Oh, and why he reckons, thanks to the all-pervasive nature of wireless technology at bike races these days, that every Grand Tour is in desperate need of an urgent security review. Here's our very gears and cybersecurity themed episode 84 of the Road CC podcast in association with Hammerhead. Enjoy. Hi, Erland. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast.
Could you tell us a bit about your background in your research and what led you towards looking at DI2?
We do research on a variety of things. Like in the past, I've done research on the security of smart homes, on self-driving cars. We had this attack where you can throw a bunch of stickers and stop signs and kind of trick the cars into thinking their speed limits.
Mm.
So a lot of interesting things depending on our current interests and what kind of interesting technology is coming out. As to what got me into this whole Di2 thing is that I myself am an amateur cyclist. I spend a lot of time cycling the mountains of California, and so it just seemed like the most obvious thing to me. Like, how come so no one has actually done a scientific analysis of the security of these things? I mean, I've seen claims, but the number one rule in computer security is don't just believe what people tell you.
Absolutely, and I just find that interesting as well. You've looked at driverless cars because that's another thing we kind of bring up sporadically on the site about the safety functions of things
Hmm.
like driverless cars and the potential dangers towards vulnerable road users, cyclists.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that's interesting that you kind of went down that angle. What kind of obviously, yeah, you mentioned about throwing things on the road. No, what other kind of conclusions did you come when you were looking at that research?
Oh, so that was like a long time. Like that was like back in like 2017, 18, when, like computer vision had experienced a big kind of leap forward in terms of its capabilities. And so we were interested in determining like how vulnerable these computer vision models are to kind of attacker inputs, right? And so we showed that an attacker could throw a few stickers on a stop sign, right? So like a stop sign on a
Yeah.
traffic sign or any other kind of sign, and then basically to a human being it would look like it is still a stop sign with vandalism, right? You've thrown
Mhm.
some black and white stickers, for example, but to the model, the computer vision model running on a self-driving car, that would look like whatever the attacker wanted it to look like. So like a speed limit 45, for instance.
So obviously you were saying about challenging the claims. Mia, is that what you were kind of thinking? Like, do you use electronic shifting yourself? Do you use DI2?
Yeah, so first, I mean, this was a collaborative project with my colleagues at Northeastern University, right? So
Mm.
Professor Anjan Ranganathan, he is a wireless security professor there, and his PhD student, Mariam. And so this was kind of the team. As to what I use myself, yes, I mean, I use this Shimano Di2 electronic shifting, but I use the wired
Okay.
version of it. I don't quite have the wireless one, but I was aware that this was a thing like since like Sram introduced it a while ago,
Mm.
and then Shimano introduced it, and now pretty much all of the major manufacturers, Sram, Shimano, and Campagnolo have versions of wireless shifting and other kinds of wireless technologies on the bike. So, kind of became like an obvious question to ask, like how does this perform under adversarial inputs?
Yeah. So so basically, could you give us a bit of an overview then on how your research, how you went about that? Obviously, like there was the black box analysis. So what you kind
Yes.
of found when when you took it apart and basically went right. What is the security behind?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so we did what they call a black box security analysis, right? So you just buy the component off the market, right? Just
Mhm.
like a normal consumer would. And then we analyze the wireless signals being emitted from the shifters to the derailleurs. And we analyze these signals using a tool called a software defined radio, or an SDR. So think of this as a kind of a device with an antenna that you plug in over USB to your computer. Costs a few $100s. Like there's a device called the Hack RF that's about $300. In our lab, we had a USRP B210 that was about $1,500. But you don't really need that kind of expensive SDR to do the attack. You can just do it with like a $300, $100 a Hack
Mhm.
RF, a Flipper Zero, or something like that. And so then, using this tool, we can essentially capture the signals that Shimano's shifters are sending to the derailleur, and these signals occur on a 2.478 gigahertz communication band. Um, and the meaning of those signals is proprietary, right? So Shimano does not say what these signals, what goes in them, what they're supposed to do, how they work. And so we did a bunch of analysis and eventually figured out that an attacker could essentially capture these signals and then replay them at a later point
Mm.
and cause unintended gear shifts in a specific setup, shifter plus derailleur kind of group set setup. The interesting thing is that you just need one upshift signal and one downshift signal. Doesn't matter what it is. It
Yeah.
can be from gear 1 to 2 or the front derailleur, big to small, doesn't matter. As long as you get one upshift and one downshift, you can recreate any sequence of shifting. So you can recreate the shifters remotely. The attacker basically has a second set of shifters on that person's bike. And so you can imagine, now you're a cyclist, you can imagine what that could do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was the thing, and that's kind of when I was like reading the study. I was kind of trying to get my head around, as you said, about like how a hacker or a potential like cheater in a race situation would. So basically, if you're using a hypothetical situation, we're at the Tour de France or the local amateur race on a Saturday morning, and the hacker would just have to be within the vicinity of a rider using Di2, shifting up and down once, and they have it, and then
Yeah,
in
they
the
have to
last.
be within a 10-meter range.
Okay.
Um, that's the range we tested. So we did all of this testing without any amplifiers on any of these radios. The non-amplified range is 10 meters, so about 30 feet, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you have to figure out, like, so you have to kind of premeditate and say, like, okay, I want to attack that specific bike. So you have to figure out a way to get those signals.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it is a large group, that is quite difficult, right? Because there will be many such signals. But if the rider is isolated or the bike is isolated, then it is fairly easy to get these signals. One possible way would be, like, when the mechanic is servicing the bike before the day's race,
Mm-hmm.
you roll up in a car nearby to this mechanic, and while they switch through the gear sequence, make sure everything is indexed or whatever, you've captured your signal and you're ready to go the next day.
Sounds fairly easy. There's another thing as well. You said, so obviously that's as you said, that's an isolated thing. That's changing, and basically what you said the output of that is, so that's how you get the signal. And then you tried this experiment, which put a video on YouTube, which if anybody wants to see it, it's quite fun in a way. It's on the site on the original story. Uh, Basically, where then they can change the gear. They become, as you said, the second shifter almost,
Yes,
another
yes,
shifter, and they can take control, move it from big ring to small ring, from the
yes,
28 to the 11. You know,
yes.
uh, and that's isolated. So, well, first of all, tell us about doing that, because you got a couple of friends or whatever, and basically said we're going to sabotage you. So, how would you go about? So, obviously, you know how to get the signal, or a way to get the signal. How do you go about then changing the gear and sabotaging
Ah,
somebody in a race?
yeah, so it's basically the same thing. So once you've captured that signal, in order to change the person's gearing, you just retransmit that signal using the exact same hardware.
Okay.
So the hardware that lets you read the signal allows you to write it back into the air. So you radiate it out into the air over an antenna, and then the derailleur is going to pick that up as a valid signal and essentially act on it,
Yeah,
right?
in that way, in the video, for instance, you had like, because obviously I think the 10-meter rule still applies, does it?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. You
yeah.
always have to be in a 10-meter sphere around the rider.
Yeah. Does the person shifting have to be in the 10-meter sphere, or just the hardware? Because they, like, you had the bag with the hardware in
Yeah,
the, it was,
yeah.
could you shift it then remotely?
So yes, so I mean the thing is, like, you can. So we didn't spend any time miniaturizing the attack because
Hmm.
we don't want to, like, We don't want to give the attackers like an off-the-shelf thing that they could go and just use to conduct these attacks.
That's
So
fair enough.
that's not scientifically very interesting, but you can imagine like a small, like, Raspberry Pi like computer
Hmm.
that someone slips in their back jersey pocket, right?
Yeah.
Another rider on the road, and then some kind of remote shifting button on their handlebars, and then that'll allow them to basically send these signals to the target. So
Ah.
the attacker could position themselves as another rider, for example, right in the group right there.
Yeah. So, but that's, I mean, it would have to be the rider who's riding close to the person they're targeting would
Yeah,
have to be doing the shifting, like the ghost
could
shifting.
be, yes.
Yeah. But
The
yeah, but
the
my
the
question.
the 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 malicious shift. Let me just be clear here. The attacker is another rider in this model, right? And they
Yes.
are trying to attack this person on a climb or descent or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That is one attack model. The other attack model is what we showed in the video, where there is a backpack thrown on the side of the road, and
Hmm.
as long as you're within the range of the backpack, that thing can be commanded to cause a shift,
Okay.
unintended shift.
Interesting. And then there was another point where you said, because that's obviously isolating a specific rider and getting the signals and targeting, so you can, basically do whatever you want with their gears. There was another thing you said where there's a potential to almost like jam a whole peloton or a whole bunch of riders, except for one maybe that's, doing it.
Right.
How did you come about that? How would that be possible?
Yes, so broad spectrum jamming is always possible. So you can just flood the 2.478 channel with noise and jam the whole group. And
Mm-hmm.
that is not new. Like, I mean, this is just a fundamental property of wireless systems. What is new in the analysis that we did was that you can target that specific rider. So you can just jam a specific person's setup without affecting the riders nearby, even if they're using the same technology, the same system. Um, and so that's kind of what we refer to as a targeted jamming attack. So like imagine that, like again in the demo video that we did, um, the attacker first shifts. You know, you're going up a steep climb. The attacker causes a shift from the small to the big in the front, and then jams. Okay, does this targeted jamming? So this means that the rider is stuck in the big ring. They can't, like, they keep pressing the buttons. That does nothing. It does not move it back. So they just have to throw that bike and get a new bike or something, or lose the race. So
Yeah,
that would be kind of the scenario there.
you've done, and we'll get on to like how you've like dealt with Shimano and your kind of your kind of correspondence with them since. But obviously, you've shown the kind of the range in which something can happen in a bike race. You know, beyond because we've obviously anybody that and yourself as well would obviously know anybody that's a fan of cycling or cycles themselves and has an interest in the racing side knows that we've had what nearly a century and a half of people trying to cheat, while racing bikes. And it's just a part of the human nature. Like, obviously, one of the big things that's kind of tangential, I think, or adjacent to what you're saying is like the whole spectre of motor doping that has kind
Yeah.
of hovered over the sport in the
Hmm.
past 10 years and kind of links into what you're saying about the bike now with wireless technology and stuff. It's not just a mechanical thing; it's a cyber physical machine that you
Hmm.
refer to now, where these electronics are part of it. And I think motor doping in a way is quite similar, where you're tampering with a bike. In one
Hmm.
way, the motor doping is to make your own bike go quicker. In your
Right.
way, it's almost even more nefarious because you're deliberately trying to halt a
Yes.
rival. So where do you think? Because obviously there's been a whole speculation over the past 10 years about motor doping and whether it's a thing in the peloton. In terms of your study, and obviously you've highlighted this could be a means of cheating at high level races or any race. Looking at it and kind of studying it, do you think it has ever been possible, or people have tried it, or anything like that, or do you think you've kind of stumbled upon something that could be a way of winning a bike race?
So it's hard for me to tell whether people have actually used anything like this, right? I mean, it's possible that attackers know about these vulnerabilities but don't talk about it. You know, that certainly happens in the computer security community more broadly. People
Mm,
know about vulnerabilities and they exploit them in the dark without letting the public know. This is a common thing that happens. Now, as to cycling specifically, I don't know. I just don't have any information about whether this is actually used or not. Um, but this kind of wireless doping, you're correct in that it is more stealthy, right? Like there is
mm,
no evidence left, right? So your performance enhancing drugs, you can test it, there is blood evidence. Your motor doping, you can x-ray the bike, there is physical evidence. But with a wireless signal, you can't, like there are so many wireless signals in the air, just
mm.
naturally because of the presence of legal shifts on people's bikes. And then there is the software problems, right? Like you can just chalk it up to, oh, my bike misshifted, right? When you were under an attack, there's simply no way to know. So in that sense, it seems somewhat more stealthy compared to other forms of um, cheating.
Well, yeah, because funny enough, just as you say that about somebody misshifting when they've attacked, and obviously I think this was still very much in the mechanical era, because I think 2010 was when famously Andy Slack attacked Alberto Contador at the 2010 Tour de France on
Yeah,
the Porte de Ballet. It was
yeah.
in the Pyrenees, and he dropped the chain, and that basically won Contador that year's
Hmm.
tour. Obviously,
Hmm.
Contador, as you said, the other means of cheating, he got stripped of his title
Hmm.
eventually. But
Hmm.
in the context of that year's race, that won
Hmm.
Contador the tour. It's like we wouldn't think twice. We looked at that and thought, and obviously this was the case that Schleck just couldn't shift properly when attacking, or
Right.
he shifted at the wrong time. He made a human error. But that's
Hmm.
the thing. Who's to say that nowadays the same thing couldn't happen? We've
Right.
seen, famously, like I'm sure you've seen like the famous kind of video of Bakamolama,
Hmm. Hmm.
screaming obscenities at
Yeah.
Sram, and
Right.
it's kind of like
Yeah.
those kind of
Exactly. Yeah. So, or it's hard to pick out, right, like what exactly might have happened, and
yeah.
and I think that's what makes it more stealthy.
Hmm.
And there is this trend of in integrating a lot of electronics and software into these bikes, and that's what we mean by them becoming cyber physical systems, right? So they're physical mechanical systems,
Hmm.
but then now you have all this software and technology in them as well. And that itself is a big research area in the broader computer security community. And this just seemed like a fun, unexplored problem to us.
Yeah, this no, absolutely. This is one of those things. I think, yeah, as you said, you're kind of like got your ear to the ground about security and that kind of thing. But it's such I think with a new technology in cycling that we're not really used to. Like I was kind of like, it's so obvious now you said it that, oh yeah, there's these, as you said, these wireless signals floating about that somebody could hack into. Like we're so we're still in the thing of, oh yeah, you have to put this motor in a bike if you're going to do any kind of like a
Yeah,
technological doping is putting
yeah,
something in. But as
yeah,
you said, there's these things that just float in the air that people can take advantage of. I think
yeah.
that's what kind of made the study so interesting. And obviously, as I was saying about how much of it was known into like the manufacturers, maybe even the racers themselves. Obviously, you're dealing with Shimano, you're dealing with their Di2 systems. How were they surprised when you came to them and said, "Here, you have a security problem with you're leaving yourself open to potential attacks"?
Yes, I think I would characterize them as being somewhat surprised, like because I think like they are traditionally a hardware manufacturer, right? And
Mm,
now that they have put in these electromechanical components and these software wireless components, they're not used to seeing attacks on their products, right? So in that sense, it is possible that they were surprised that these kinds of things can happen. Now that said, once we were able to get to the right people in Shimano, it was a very pleasant experience working with them to first explain what the issue was, help their engineers replicate the issues in their facilities, and then kind of uh, discuss mitigations that you might implement in software to make this much harder to exploit. Um, so overall, it was quite a pleasant experience working with the Shimano engineers and kind of getting this fix rolled out, this mitigation rolled out to people.
yeah, because you've been working with them, I think, since the early part of this year you came to them with the study?
Approximately March, yes,
Yeah.
mid March is when we first contacted them, and the whole thing has been under embargo until like August 12th.
Okay, so Shimano, because that's the thing about obviously the embargo of the study and all that. Obviously, they were kind of working on the fix, working
Yeah.
on hardware, firmware updates, that kind of thing. Were they? So, do you know how much like correspondence or kind of communication they had with the pro teams? Who obviously are the
Ah,
kind of yeah,
yeah, yeah. So once we had identified mitigation and implemented it in the shifters and tested it out, then Shimano privately contacted the pro teams saying that this is an update you need to apply to your systems. Um, and the second phase of their rollout was to give it to the general consumer market. And I'm not exactly sure like how what is the status of that. You'd have to ask Shimano like like, where in the process they are right now.
yeah. I think it's a case of rolling out
Yeah,
at the moment. Yeah, but
yeah,
it's interesting that
yeah.
I think they said in the statement that basically all the teams knew, like any team, obviously
Yes,
the kind of
yes,
mentioned the races are going on at the moment or recently, the Tour de France Femme, the Vuelta España,
yes.
which is on now. Like it's saying every team that's taken part in that who rides
Hmm.
Shimano
Hmm.
knows about it and has the
Yes.
but
They
it's
have the update. Yeah.
Yeah, they have the update. It'd be interesting to know. I don't know how much you know about it, but it'd be interesting to know how the teams themselves responded.
I would love to know that. Yeah, if you can find that out, I would love to. My understanding is that they notified the team mechanics,
Mm,
um, so they might be the people to ask,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
Uh, yeah,
and obviously the other part of it is that not everybody rides Shimano Di2.
yes,
How much do you know about the other group set manufacturers, obviously Sram and Campagnolo? How have
right.
they responded to your study so far?
I haven't read anything from the other group set manufacturers. We didn't even look at SRAM and Campagnolo. We might look at SRAM at some point in the future.
Hmm.
Um, but we just looked at Shimano because it seemed like the biggest market share in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be interesting in future, like in terms of future research, and maybe look and see are those
Yeah.
kind of blind spots available.
Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about like why we did all of this, right? Like I
Yeah.
mean, as scientists, like our goal is to raise awareness about security blind spots. Right? Our goal is not to equip attackers or teach them new ways to to do bad things. Our goal is to raise awareness so that the security improves. And in the case of Shimano, it did improve. Um, and so once you open up this area, right, then a lot more security researchers start to look into
Hmm.
into these things. And so if not me, someone else will look into SRAM. That's just the way of how that's just the way things work. Um, and so it is likely that people will start looking into the security of other wireless control systems on bikes and other aspects of technology on bikes that could be potentially vulnerable.
Yeah. It is quite alarming. Like obviously we've focused and your study kind of focused on the professional aspect of it, the kind of potential to cheat to win it, bike races and professional in the peloton. But obviously it's a bit alarming for like just like somebody like yourself who has an electronic shifting on their bike that could be hacked by anybody.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Like, what do you think? Like, as you
right.
said, your job is to kind of, alert people to security blind spots, and that's a big one. Like we're talking about, obviously, it's one thing in the case of cheating to win a race, but it's also another thing where you could be just riding along, and for some reason your signal could be jammed. It could be dangerous.
So I think like like non-professional riders have not nothing to worry about. Like I personally find it very hard to believe that on my Saturday group ride someone is out to get me by hacking my shifters. And that just seems like a threat that is very 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 small. So if you're a amateur rider, you know, just going out on your bike, I don't think you're going to be hacked. I mean, that's totally not the motivation
Yeah,
for these kinds of things. Um, the highly competitive sporting environments is where the environment is adversarial. And I mean, they're by definition adversarial environments. You're trying to win the race.
hmm,
You're not friends with the people there, right? At least while you're racing.
yeah.
But on a group ride, I don't think so. No.
Hopefully, as you said, it instead of giving ideas to the hackers, you've closed off an avenue anyway for potential another. What would we call it?
Yeah.
Obviously, with motor doping, shifter doping, maybe
Wireless doping. That's
wireless
that's the
doping.
that's the word. Like if that becomes a thing, I'd be that would be cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Wireless doping
Well,
would be.
it's almost
Um,
anti. Well, I was going to say it's not anti-doping. You couldn't use it that way, but it's almost like is it doping if you're stopping a rival rather than making yourself go quicker?
that is a good question.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, I'll not
Um,
take wireless doping off you. I think you should keep that. We'll coin wireless doping and keep it that way. But yeah, maybe in 10 years' time we'll talk about how the specter of wireless doping hang over the peloton.
yeah, I mean there's a lot of technology at these events, right? I mean,
Mm,
the bikes themselves are just one piece of it, but if you think of the actual race, there is a lot of technology operating there.
mm,
And someone needs to do a proper security review, right? So like the Tour de France, the Giro, the Vuelta, they need like actual security professionals to be looking into this kind of thing, right? And I hope for their sake they do.
Yeah.
If I was them, I would be, I would spend the time to essentially
Do
do a
you think
proper
it's
job
that?
here.
Is it that big a problem? Do you think? Uh,
Well, it's I don't know if it's a problem right now, but the big rule in computer security is that you don't want to wait till it's too late.
okay.
You want to
Yeah.
kind of get ahead of the attackers. You never want to be reactive. You want
Yeah.
to be proactive, shut down all kinds of problems before they happen.
So that's slightly worrying. This is somebody who knows a bit about cycling's doping past. The authorities are never a step ahead of the ones
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
with the
So
system. So,
I think this is an opportunity to like for people to get ahead of
uh,
any potential problems.
yeah, I don't know how confident I am when we're still reliant on iPads to scan for for motors and bikes. So, but yeah, but you think so that that's the kind of that would be the lesson learned from this is that the cycling's governing bodies should really kind of have a security review of their races and really look into how this new technology is being implemented and could potentially be used. Yeah.
I think that's one good learning. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Arnold, for I'll let you go, and thanks very much for coming along to the podcast and explaining all that, and thanks again for the study. It was incredibly interesting.
Thank you so much for having me here.